Hello my friends, in today's video we will take a look at Sony A7 IV. This is the most highly anticipated camera in years and I was finally able to buy one. A7 IV offers a lot of updates over the A7 III, but there is almost 4-year gap between A7 III and IV, so the expectations are naturally very high. In this video we will take a look at the performance and the feature set of A7 IV, and I will try to evaluate whether Sony was able to meet these expectations. A7 IV looks and feels similar to A7S III on the outside, which is definitely not a bad thing. It uses very similar 4th generation body, specifically the thicker version with a rotating screen. It is still a very compact camera, especially when we consider what is inside. It is noticeably thicker than the A7 III, but it only weighs 658 grams, so it is still a very nimble and portable camera. The build quality is generally very good. It uses a magnesium frame of course, and it feels very solid overall. Fortunately, Sony has switched to proper port doors in Gen 4 bodies, and the weather sealing has also been updated. As I will explain later, the size to performance ratio is very impressive. A7 IV uses a brand new 33 megapixel backside illuminated full frame sensor. The increase of resolution wasn't necessarily a highly requested feature, but I think that 33 megapixels is a good compromise in 2022 and beyond. Unlike the A7 III, it doesn't have a low pass filter, which means that you will get look that is closer to A7R series. It really captures a lot of detail, so it may be interesting for photographers who were previously using A7R IV line. The RAWs are not compatible with Lightroom yet, so I wasn't able to fully evaluate the low light performance and the dynamic range. That will most likely be similar to other Sony BSI sensors. That means clean up to ISO 3200, mostly usable ISO 6400, somewhat usable ISO 12800, and ISO 25600 as an emergency option. Basically the same applies to the dynamic range. That is definitely not an issue on modern Sony sensors, so I expect it to be excellent and provide more than sufficient room for editing, even in difficult situations such as the sunsets. The colors aren't that different in comparison to recent Sony cameras, but I'm definitely not complaining. Sony aims for maximal color accuracy, and that is basically what you will get. The colors are not overly warm or vibrant. It is a good starting point for RAW development. Overall, I am very happy with the sensor and the output of A7 IV. I do appreciate high resolution, the low light performance and the dynamic range are great, so I don't really have anything to complain about. Another area where I definitely can't complain is the autofocus. A7 IV uses Sony's latest autofocus system with 759 phase detection points and 425 contrast detection points. It also has the latest software, which means that it is flawless. The focus acquisition is instant and it is 100% reliable in any conditions. Backlit subjects and low light situations are not a problem at all. That also applies to eye autofocus. Of course, it works great with humans and also with Codecs and other animals including birds, which is mighty impressive. Real-time eye autofocus also works in video. It is not a new feature, but in my opinion it is still very impressive. The autofocus in video generally works great. Unlike on older Sony cameras, here you have 7 steps for autofocus speed and 5 for responsiveness, which is now called Shift Sense. These can completely change the behavior of autofocus. The difference between 1 and 7 and 1 and 5 is huge. I definitely recommend trying these out. If you don't want to do so, default settings will be suitable for all-round use. Overall, I am 100% happy with the autofocus. A7 IV uses an IB system rated for 5.5 stops that we have already seen in A7S III or A7R IV. This is in my opinion a very underrated IB system. It is highly effective and I especially like very predictable behavior of this IBIS, which is not trying to fix the image in place and then snap when it can no longer do so. I would say that it is sufficient for static shots up to about 75 mm. Much like with every Sony camera, the body size to stabilization efficiency is excellent. Besides that, A7 IV also has active mode, which combines in-body image stabilization and digital stabilization. The additional crop in active mode is about 1.1 times, which is quite acceptable. It works very well and it definitely makes a big difference. Even more interesting option is to use the gyro data. I think that this is the future of stabilization. A7 IV can store the gyro data within the normal video file, and these can be used to stabilize the footage using Catalyst Bro software. At the moment, it works very well with ultra-wide lenses. The video specs are a big upgrade over the A7 III. First of all, it shoots 4K video downsampled from 7K. This is the most detailed 4K video that I've ever got from any camera that I've tested. The amount of detail is incredible. I actually prefer this look over A7S III, but I will talk about that in a dedicated comparison. Another big change are the codecs. A7 IV can shoot 4K Ultra HD video in 10-bit 422 using all-intra or long GOP encoding. The all-intra bitrate goes up to 250 megabits per second in 25p and 500 megabits per second in 50p. In long GOP, it is very manageable 140 megabits per second in 25p and 200 megabits per second in 50p in 4K 422 10-bit. I still like to use Picture Profile 8 with gamma change to Cine 4, which is a good compromise between the dynamic range and ease of color grading. Base ISO for Cine 4 is 125, which is an improvement over 200 on A7 III. As Cinetone is also available on A7 IV, and it is an interesting picture profile. It reveals more shadow detail and it is a bit flatter and softer than Picture Profile off. I will have to do more testing with S-Cinetone, but I generally like this kind of look. S-Log 3 works great on A7 IV. 10-bit footage captures plenty of information for expanding that flat gamma curve, and it captures great amount of dynamic range. S-Log is definitely not for everyone, but I can say that advanced filmmakers will like it a lot. I will talk more about the S-Log in future videos. That brings us to the elephant in the room, which is the cropped 4K 60p. Full sensor 4K 60 was a highly requested feature, but it didn't happen. Sony could have easily do that using line skipping, which would be the preferable option in my opinion, but they have decided not to do so, and that is a disappointment. There is no way around saying that. A7 IV can shoot 1.5 times cropped or APS-C or Super 35 4K 60p. Here it is much better than on Nikon Z6 II or Panasonic S1. It is downsampled from 4.6K and it actually looks very decent. It still captures a very solid amount of detail, and it is 10-bit 422, so I wouldn't hesitate at all to use it together with full sensor 4K. The main inconvenience is that you will have to compensate for the field of view by using different focal length. The amount of rolling shutter is similar to A7 III and other IMX410 cameras. There is some, but it definitely won't ruin your footage. If you are filming something like bullet trains, you can completely fix the rolling shutter simply by applying rolling shutter repair in post. For me, and in my opinion, the rolling shutter on A7 IV is not a big deal at all. Despite the cropped 4K 60p, Sony A7 IV still offers great video specs. Downsampled 7K to 4K video in combination with 10-bit 422 codec and Sony's picture profiles looks absolutely fantastic. There are also two big changes regarding the HDMI output. The first one is that it is full-size HDMI, which is more durable and generally easier to use. The second change is that we can finally have clean HDMI output and functioning camera screen at the same time. Another extremely impressive feature is the focus breathing compensation. That will use clear image zoom to compensate for the focus breathing on some lenses. It works extremely well with 24mm GM and 20mm G. There will be some crop when you use this function, but it is very useful for serious filmmaking. Regarding the handling, there are some significant changes with Gen 4 bodies. First of all, A7 IV has a quite large and deep grip. It is well shaped and it will be a welcome change for users with larger hands. I didn't mind Gen 3 grip, but I do prefer A7 IV grip. The buttons are also much more raised. Thanks to current weather in Central Europe, I can confirm that it significantly improves handling when you are wearing gloves. The placement of the buttons and dials is similar to A7 III or A7R IV, which is a good thing in my opinion. There are 3 changes though. The first one is the relocation of the video record button, but I have relocated that back to C1, which makes more sense in my opinion. The second change is that the former exposure compensation dial is now programmable and you can use it for various functions. The third and the most important positive change is the stills and video mode switch. That gives you the option to have completely separate settings for stills and video. I use very different settings for stills and video, including exposure and picture profile settings. It is extremely convenient and fast on the go. The most significant upgrade in terms of the handling is the new user interface. First of all, you can finally operate everything using the touchscreen. That includes the function menu, which is otherwise the same as on older cameras, which is okay. The main menu is completely new. It uses a vertical layout and it is very well structured. Being a long-term Sony user, I got used to it basically immediately. For example, the button settings are now correctly placed in the setup menu and the autofocus transition speed is no longer 11 pages away from focus mode setting. The font size is a bit small, but I prefer to have more information on the screen. Overall, big thumbs up for the user interface on A7 IV. A7 IV uses a 3-inch 1.04 million dot display. This resolution is low by 2021 standards. I was ready to bash this screen a lot, but it wasn't that terrible in real-world use. Fortunately, the brightness is sufficient, so visibility in direct sunlight is not compromised. The color accuracy also seems to be better in comparison to A7 III. It is usable and fine for composing and judging the exposure, but the resolution is not great. The screen is rotating, which was inevitable. I still don't think that it is a correct choice for a camera such as this one, but there was external pressure, so I can't blame Sony for doing this. The viewfinder uses a well-known 3.69 million dot panel with 0.78 times magnification. It is completely fine to use, sufficiently detailed, and the size is about right. It is not as impressive as 5.7 or 9.4 million dot viewfinders on A7R IV and A7S III, but those are more of a luxury rather than necessity. A7 IV can shoot 10 frames per second with mechanical shutter and continuous autofocus, which is not bad, but it is less than the competition. On the other hand, it shoots 33 megapixel images rather than 20 or 24 megapixel. RAWs are compressed in 10 frames per second mode, but it is lossless compression, so it is not that big of a deal. The buffer capacity is super impressive though, it is basically unlimited. I'm not really sure how to evaluate fast shooting capabilities. Thanks to that excellent autofocus, it is in my opinion a very capable sports and wildlife camera within the hybrid category, especially if you are willing to trade some frames per second for higher resolution. A7 IV has two UHS-2 compatible card slots. One card slot is also compatible with CF Express cards Type A. The good news is that you don't have to use them. You need V90 UHS-2 cards to shoot all Intra 4K codecs. For everything else, you can use V60 cards. I use these V60 Lexar UHS-2 cards because they are made in 256GB version, and Lexar is one of the two SD card manufacturers that I fully trust. A7 IV uses NP-FZ100 batteries just like older Sony full-frame cameras. It is rated for 580 shots, which is very solid. I was able to get 2 hours and 30 minutes of continuous 4K recording on a single charge using the highest internal recording settings. I have conducted this test at 21 degrees Celsius and the camera was barely warm at the end. I wasn't able to test the overheating any further since the outside temperature during my testing was around 0 degrees. To sum up, my first impressions are overwhelmingly positive. A7 IV is a well-rounded hybrid camera and it fulfills the majority of requirements of hybrid users in 2022. It retains all of the usual Sony strengths such as compact size, excellent autofocus, dynamic range, great battery life, lens selection, and so on. Sony didn't get much credit for increasing the resolution, but it will help the A7 IV stay relevant for a long time, so I do appreciate it. The video quality and codecs are fantastic. It is basically everything that we could wish for in this class. It isn't quite perfect though. Full sensor 4K 60p would have probably made it a no-brainer, but it unfortunately didn't happen. 10 frames per second shooting isn't particularly impressive, but it is a 33 megapixel entry-level camera, so I'm not sure how much criticism is in place. The screen resolution is low, there is no excuse for that. Other than these three things, I have nothing to complain about and some A7 IV strengths are huge, so I still think that it is the best camera in class by a solid margin. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share your opinion, please do so in the comment section and see you next time.